we changed our password, so we've been getting very few emails now. So I don't know. I was never I never had I had a Gmail account when I was teaching. That's not the Gmail account name. My email is someplace. Trying to adapt it, to Gmail. I don't have a Gmail account, and I know our kids called too, and then it also said on there sent from my iPhone. Kids picked up on. I don't have an iPhone, so. I know, but the number of people called and just, few people emailed.
You got it handled? All right. Being 7 o'clock, we'll call the Marathon County Board of Supervisors to order. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing because that will be followed by a moment of reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And we will have the reading of the notice, please.
An educational meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors will be held at the Marathon County Courthouse, Assembly Room 500 Forest Street in the city of Wausau at 7 p.m. on Thursday, February 20th, 2020, and the agenda was duly signed and posted.
Thank you. I would like to request everyone please silence their cell phones or put them on vibrate as to not to be an interruption to the meeting. Thank you. And we'll move on to roll call. I'd invite all of the supervisors to please sign in. And thank you. And I would like to welcome all of the visitors that we have here with us tonight, along with the viewing audience. We will move on to public comment, and we have two individuals who have requested permission to speak. We have 15 minutes allocated, so again, we will allocate 7.5 minutes to each individual. And we will start with number one, Jonathan Frothenberry from 511 Roger Drive, Wausau. And I'd invite him to the podium up here and address the board.
Here?
Yes.
It's actually Johnny Fortenberry.
Okay.
No Jonathan or Froth, but that's okay.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. So I didn't realize there was going to be such a big crowd here tonight, and I apologize for those of you not interested. But this is the next step for me to take with my uphill battle with Marathon County Social Services. We moved here about 9 years ago. 7 minutes. We moved here 9 years ago and became foster parents. Right away, I told the Marathon County Social Services I'm not interested in the 12-year-old girl whose parents got picked up for drugs and she needs a place to stay for the weekend. We're looking for children that truly have no hope of finding any family to take them in. That being said, never one time did I turn away kids whenever I was called. When they called, I knew that I was the last resort, and every time I said, yes. We eventually adopted our son after 2.5 years, even though his parents voluntarily terminated parental rights and did that on the condition that we become his adoptive parents. It still took 2.5 years in the system. In May of 16, we got another little boy. His name was Rias, and brought him in. He had no family. Father was unadjudicated. Mother was gone to the wind. Nobody wanted this little boy, and we took him in. He was about 6 months old when we got him, and we had him for about 3.5 years. I have 3 other biological daughters, all young, all still at home, and Rias was their brother. He was our son. About February of 17, our social worker, one of the several we had during this course of this time, started sharing with us that, oh, this is the best place for Rias, there's no hope, and this is the person, you're the great family, and the goal for us is adoption. Then about 2018, they said, oh, ICWA may be involved. The father, who is unadjudicated, may have Native American blood. And that was enough to start moving things along. And I said, I don't know what the laws are. We want to adopt this child. The social worker said, this is the best place for this child. Throughout that time, we were told multiple times by Marathon County Social Services, the primary goal is adoption. The primary goal is adoption. And then all of a sudden, this family showed up from Appleton area and said, oh, we're Native American, so we would like to have him instead. And you can debate the laws all you want to, but it's discrimination. He was removed from our home and placed to another home solely because he has Native American blood in him. The fact that he lived with us for 3.5 years, all of his life, the fact that we were his family meant nothing. They started showing, Rias was a young kid, he didn't know. We would put him in a van that social services contracted with a driver that we didn't know that'd show up to our house, say, Rias, I know you're only 2 years old, but we're gonna put you in this car with a stranger, and you're gonna go to this family's house for the weekend, but don't worry, you'll be back on Monday. And that was great for the family. They got him all weekend, and we had him during the week, and we were appreciative of our time, but it was tearing that kid apart. June of last year, we had a hearing here at the courthouse, and I laid out my case and basically said, nothing we can do. That's the law. That is what ICWA does. Native American children have to be placed with Native American parents. If the same thing were true of a Chinese family or a black family, people would look at me and say that was absurd. During that time, at that June 10th hearing, I'm sorry, it was a little bit before June 10th, June hearing of last year, I wanted to bring the social worker up to say, yes, I've identified this family, I've spent time with them, and this is the best place for this child. She was let go. We don't know exactly what happened, but she was not available. So we go along and say, okay, I want to appeal. Went to her supervisor and said, I want to appeal this. Show me what I need to do. She gave me all the paperwork, and I did everything I was supposed to do, and I did my appeal down in Madison, and they said, oh, well, we can't do it there. We have to do it by telephone. Oh, can you do this? Fine, whatever. I just want to get my voice heard. During this time, I tried multiple lawyers all around Wausau, Wisconsin Rapids. Nobody wants to touch it. It's Equa. They know they're going to lose. I asked the supervisor and said, what can I do? She gave me all this paperwork. Well, it was the wrong court to appeal to. When I brought that up to social services and said, this is the wrong court. Oh, I'm sorry, time has elapsed now. Now you can appeal. Okay, well, what about the supervisor that said this is the way I was supposed to go? Oh, she doesn't work here anymore. It almost seems like it's conspiracy. My wife would argue that it is. I'm not quite there yet. After he left, obviously it broke our family's heart. We brought some stuff to social services and said we'd like to get this to him. Can this be delivered? Oh, well, we don't know. We'll get back to you. I met with Stacia Burrows, who was the next person up in the supervisory list, in August of 19, just last August, and said, his birthday's coming up. What can we do? Can the kids send him a card? Anything? Oh, I'll get back to you. I'll get back to you. I'll get back to you. Nothing. December, this past Christmas.
John, I
called
just
right-
want to give you a 1-minute warning, so you got 1 minute to wrap
Okay.
up. I'm sorry.
Okay, I understand. In December, I called Stacia Burrows again at Marathon County Social Services and said, I haven't heard from you. What's going on? Oh, your name's right here at the top of my list. I was just getting ready to call you. After 4 months, she was just getting ready to call me. I said, yes, I would like to know, can we get something for Rias? Can my children buy him Christmas gifts? And I don't want to be a cheapskate, but I don't want to buy gifts, send them to him if they're not going to allow him to have them. Oh, I'll let you know, I'll let you know. February, just a couple weeks ago, I called back. Your name's right here at the top of my list. And oh, I'm sorry, I thought you got this information. And she left me a voicemail and said, no, the family's not interested right now. They don't want any contact with you whatsoever. I don't know what this board can do. I want my voice to be heard, so maybe there's somebody out there that will say, you know what? This is not right. It's not right. I don't have any illusions about getting Rias back. Someday, we will be reunited after he becomes an adult and he seeks out the family that raised him for the first part of his life. Until that time comes, I'm not sure what to do other than just keep moving up the food chain, and hopefully this all will be changed sometime.
Okay, thank you. The second individual who would like to address the board is John Gravine, 1650 Noggart Drive, Merrill. And so I invite John to the podium, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your comments. I was did foster parenting for 15 years, and it's a very difficult, hard job to do. I never seeked adoption, but I tell you, I really cared for those kids that I took care of. And it's the environment it's just, I thank you for your service. My name is John Gravine. I'm here to thank this board for unanimously passing the resolution for seeking more state funding for our district attorney's office. I really appreciate that, okay? And I really want to thank the Public Safety Committee. They worked on it really hard. It's just, it took 3 drafts to get that, and they got it, okay? But I tell you one thing, just to have you pass a resolution and just say it's taken care of, I think it's like in the wind. You know, it isn't going to be heard. So what I'm here for is to try and get your support to get a hold of our governor, Tony Evers, our lieutenant governor, Mr. Barnes. We have 2 senators, Petrosky and Tiffany, and we have 5 representatives. Take some time and write them some letters, okay? I mean, mine went off Tuesday. I probably made it a lot more complicated than what it had to be, but I did it, okay? And I want to follow up. I want to make sure that our voices are heard. If we don't we're gonna come back. I was at the Public Safety Committee meeting, and Teresa was telling us how she had to cut back on the services she does for social services. She's not not able to listen to getting what she normally has been doing, all the work that they've been putting in. So we need to support this resolution and get it through and make our voices heard, okay? Just like that shooting that happened at the cemetery. It was on the news, it got delayed. The reason it got delayed is because there was some technicality or something. When I was at the Public Safety Committee meeting, I said, you know, it was because of their workload that they have. They need help. And we need help from this board. I mean, it can be that simple. Just, like I said, I sent out letters. I asked and request for help because I'm not a public speaker either. And I definitely can't type, so I had my wife do some of this. So there's help out there if you ask people to do it. So just take it to heart. You know, these guys are representing us residents in Marathon County, and we need to be heard. I heard a little news snippet at noon today. Apparently, John Spiros got a flood of emails, apparently 16. And at least whatever the issue was, they got heard, okay? I don't know what the issue was, but I really like to see this county board step up to the plate and do their job representing the residents of Marathon County. It's just hard to believe. It's just, I mean, it isn't that hard. I mean, you guys represent everybody. You represent towns and villages. Take it to your towns and villages. Ask them to write it. Just say, I'm in support of our resolution. But I mean, there's a lot more people can say about supporting this resolution. I had help writing my letter, but a lot of the things that I wrote in my letter was just right out of the resolution. It isn't that hard. You know, it's just, please step up and let us be heard down in Madison so we can, you know, have the support that we need for our county. You know, I'm pushing for the county. I don't want to push for the state. I mean, our district attorney office does a lot. And apparently our district attorney office has done a lot for the state. And I'm just trying to drum up support. You don't have to do it, please do it yourself, but I mean, ask others too. I mean, there's, City of Wausau is easy, and there's the town of Satine, and you know, there's everybody. You represent everybody. I live in the village of Maine, and they're definitely gonna hear my voice, and hopefully they step up to the plate, because it's an important part of our community that we have here. But I'd like to thank you for passing the resolution, but I mean, just passing it, I don't think it's gonna be enough. We're gonna be in the same ballpark. I listened to that big meeting that we had back in November that went till 1 o'clock in the morning. You know, it's just, we passed the resolution. Let's get the support we need for it. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, John. And with that, that'll end our public comment, and we will move on to item number 8, education presentation reports, standing committee chairpersons or designees. Supervisor Robinson.
The Infrastructure and Public Safety Committee will be doing a joint meeting the first Thursday of March, where we've invited Frontier to come in to try to address some of the issues relating to the failing phone systems, and as the information is going out, we're finding that there are more and more problems. That meeting will be at 9 o'clock at the River Drive Center, I think in conference room 2, but we have a representative from Frontier that will be there, as well as a number of state and federal officials. And we're hoping that we can at least enlighten people. The problem with deregulation of the industry, telecom industry, is that there aren't a lot of tools, and we can be a bully pulpit for trying to bring attention to it, but if you're interested, as Supervisor Drabeck is, please come to that joint meeting.
Okay, any other chairpersons or designees reports on standing committees? Okay, we'll move on to review and discussion on Tuesday meeting agenda items. Items 9A, 1, appointments, the 2020 emergency fire wardens.
From the town of Bevent, appointing Dwayne Morosek. Town of Hamburg, Jerry and Judy Block. Town of Mosinee, Jeff Kos. And Town of Rib Mountain, the current fire chief for the Safer Fire Department.
Any questions on that, those appointments? Okay, item 9A2, Public Library Board.
Reappointing County Supervisor Gary Beestrom and Sharon Hunter for a term to end December 31st, 2022.
Any questions on those appointments? Okay, item 9A3, Community Development Block Grant Housing Regional Board.
Reappointing Supervisor Rick Seafelt for a 2-year term to expire April 19th, 2022.
Any questions on that appointment? Okay, item 9A4, Civil Service Commission.
Appointing Dave Peeler to the Civil Service Commission for a 5-year term to expire December 31st, 2024.
Questions on that appointment? Okay, over to ordinances. Item 9B1, Environmental Resources Committee. 9B1A, Town of McMillan Rezone. Robert Postuluk for Yellowstone Crossing LLC, Ordinance 2-20. Any questions? Item 9B1B, ordinance amending General Code of Ordinances for Marathon County, Chapter 17, Zoning Code, Ordinance 0-3-20. Supervisor Robinson.
One of the provisions in that rewrite is an update of the wind energy system regulations, and we've been working, Scott, Dom and I, on some changes relative to public participation and making sure that we're allowing the citizens the right to have agreements relative to compensation and a few other changes. So there will be an amendment that will incorporate some of the provisions that we missed in the state statutes coming in. But I would encourage you, if you have concerns, to take a look at that, and we can perhaps have a presentation on it, given the fact that we've got a wind farm proposal coming in from Brighton and Eau Plaine in the near future, and perhaps highlight that at our next meeting.
Okay. Scott would like to address the board.
If I could just say, we did do a presentation for the Environmental Resources Committee. If there's anybody, and we kind of addressed a couple of questions there and our interactions with the folks from EDP at that committee. Is there anybody else on the board that has any other specific questions about the wind energy system, so that we can make sure that we address that on Tuesday then? Okay, well, we can definitely give you an overview, and essentially we'd ask you to take a look at it. It does largely incorporate a lot of language from the administrative code and from the Wisconsin statutes. The statute is section 660401. The administrative code section is PSC 128. So it does incorporate a lot of those provisions, but we tried to strike a balance between the sort of the explanation of what we're doing and the citation to the administrative code. So we'll be back with a more overview on Tuesday.
Supervisor Seiler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So question, Scott, when this, excuse me, Mr. Robinson, Chair Robinson, Chair of Infrastructure, what is the name of the company again?
EDP Renewables.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
When that entity first did a presentation to Infrastructure Committee, shortly after that, there was a letter from, I think, was it the Wood County? It was a Wood County supervisor that noted some concerns when Wood County had been approached to consider this. And so I'm just wondering if you've had an opportunity, or Supervisor Robertson, have you, do you recall any of those concerns, and have they all been addressed? I know somewhere I've got that letter and there were things laid out there. I'm just wondering if we've covered all the bases that another county had concerns about.
My understanding is that some of the concerns that were raised at that point had to do with the amount of money that the farmers or the people that own the property were being offered in return for the easements for that development. That's not really, that's not really something that Marathon County can regulate. What we did, though, look at was decommissioning, financial assurance, which are the kinds of things that we can regulate, and setting up a structure in order to grant that kind of permit. If it's going to be a wind farm of that size, it's going to be done as a conditional use permit through the Board of Adjustment for Marathon County. And so what we wanted to do is, at least for my benefit, was to set up a structure where it was understandable what they were going to have to do, what process they were going to have to go through in order to get their permit from Marathon County. So those are the business interests that the county has, the health and safety and welfare of the county. That's what we're trying to address in it.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that.
Supervisor Gomes.
As I read this thing in front of me, it says, the surrounding area, make Marathon County the surrounding area a preferred place to live, work, visit, and do business. How does a wind farm sending their electricity away meet those goals? That would be my question. Scott?
Well, that's kind of a rhetorical question, I think. So, as we did with metallic mining, what our job is to do is to establish some kind of regulatory framework so that if people do want to use their property, as they're allowed to do, that the interest of Marathon County that can be enforced, again, with the support of the administrative code and the Wisconsin statutes, in the zoning framework, establish that if these things go up, they're going to be monitored, and if they're going to come down, that there's financial assurance to make sure that there's money to pay for that when the time comes.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, we'll move on from Public Safety Committee. Item 9B, 2A, Conservation Planning and Zoning Director or his or her designee authorizes to issue citations for violations of Uniform Addressing System Ordinance 0-4-20. Supervisor Opel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you can recall, many of you, Rib Mountain especially is quite sensitive to this issue yet. And we were wondering what all this encompasses. Really, it's very general. And I guess we'd like to see what the actual rules are going to be. Another board member on the town board has brought this to me, and I noticed it also. And we really don't know what's going on here. Can we get a clarification?
I will let Corp Counsel address the issue.
Well, my understanding in very broad strokes, and if you, and if you want me to take a closer look at the ordinance, I certainly can give you a more specific answer to that. But my understanding and my recollection from when it was drafted was essentially the requirement that, that each street have signs that are assigned. I believe that has occurred with respect to every town within Marathon County that was not incorporated. And so as far as I know, there has been no violation or issue with respect to those sign placements for the road signs. There has been some, my understanding is some frustration concerning the placement of the yard signs. And at least in my mind, that is an issue that might come to enforcement. But as far as I know, I have not been approached regarding, because we have a process. What this is so that the zoning department in their stepped enforcement, if we have an issue with where the sign is placed, or somebody pulls up their sign and walks away with it, if we have that kind of issue, their stepped enforcement says, we're gonna get in contact with that person. We're gonna try to write a letter regarding what has happened. We're going to try to resolve whatever that issue is. But if we're not able to do that, that's where I primarily see a possible legal issue. We already have the authority under the current ordinance they could come to my office and we could draft a long form summons and complaint and have people served with that kind of thing. That has not come to pass. We have not talked about any particular individuals who appear to be not complying with the law. We feel that there has been very good compliance. There's not happy compliance with respect to some people, I will say that, but there has been very good compliance. So essentially, that's where I see the citation possibly taking place.
Sheriff's office already has the authority to issue.
And I would also say that under the current format, the sheriff's department can already issue such citations. And the question is going to be, well, at what stage would you want to involve law enforcement in essentially an issue that has been governed by conservation planning and zoning up to this point. I believe there are other requirements that if you're applying for a building permit, that there's going to have to be an address assigned to that. As far as I know, that has not been a difficulty. People that want to develop and build, they want to make sure that they have a good address from the get-go. So again, that hasn't been the kind of scenario that I think would draw an enforcement request. So does that answer your question sufficiently?
Yeah, I think so. I can take that back to my board.
All right.
Okay, Supervisor Gums.
I'll confess, I moved my sign. Anyway, I had to move it because TDS was burying stuff in the ground for the telecommunications industry or whatever, but nobody knows about that. But my thing is, we're worrying about enforcing. The road signs still aren't up. You can go down Highway 13 and they don't have the right signs up designating what the road is. And maybe they're having a hard time spelling Würzburg. I can't spell it either, but on 13, they has the old road name up. So all I'm saying is everything's got to be in order first, And I was talking to Mr. Kurtzwell, the assessor, and he called it a disaster too. So a lot of things got to fall into place. Just my opinion.
Okay, any other questions on that item 9B A2? Okay, resolutions. Item 9C1, County Board of Supervisors, changes in supervisory district boundaries resulting from City of Wausau annexation, Resolution 7-20. Any questions on that resolution? Okay, from the Health and Human Services Committee, item 9C, 2A, to approve successor agreement for the joint sponsorship of community programs between Marathon, Langlade, Lincoln counties that creates North Central Healthcare. And we're going to have a brief presentation by the interim administrator, Lance Leonard, on this new agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is really just a follow-up to the presentation that I made at your last meeting. Within your packet, you have the complete proposed agreement, and we've made several presentations, most recently at Health and Human Services, and walked through the major changes. I'm going to do that, as the chair said. I'm going to try to be brief today. We've done a couple of presentations, and I want to go and use a term that was used in one of those presentations by the North Central Healthcare Board Chair, Jeff Zerini. Supervisor Zerini referred to this new agreement as, part of the evolution of the issues that we were dealing with in 2016, and I think that's a good word, and I'll kind of use that framework. So I'll start with where we found ourselves, where you found yourselves in 2016. The board had various issues with respect to, or concerns, I'll say, with respect to operations within North Central, and particularly two main components that it was troubled by, in my estimation or characterization, with respect to the underlying agreement that had existed for decades with North Central Healthcare, or created North Central Healthcare, that had existed with Lincoln and Langlade counties. Those two things that ultimately the counties asked Corporation Counsel and administration to work with Langlade and Lincoln to address were really some additional methods of oversight, and they wanted us to have a time-limited contract as opposed to the contract that we had in the past, which was simply unending. And again, the oversight really speaks for itself, but the rationale, excuse me, that was provided for the time-limited component was that if something's time-limited, you tend to frequently look at it when you get close to the end of that agreement. And that's really why I'm here today. I'm one of the members of the Retained County Authority Committee, and you'll hear me use that term a couple of times. That was that mechanism through which the counties sought to have that additional oversight relative to North Central Healthcare. And the way that that was done was through the Retained County Authority Committee. The idea being the counties wanted to provide additional direction and really additional input into some decisions that were being made at North Central Healthcare, really just to provide additional context for how programs and services at North Central really impact programs and services delivered by other county departments. So just as a little bit of context, in the vast majority of counties within the state, North Central Healthcare exists as a county department, a community programs department, or in most counties, a health and human services department integrating the health department, social services, and mental health treatment. So it was really to try to make that tie more explicit. So what was added within that time-limited component in 2016 was a requirement that this Retained County Authority Committee, which is comprised of myself, Chief Deputy Billup from the Sheriff's Office, Nancy Bergstrom, the Corporation Counsel from Lincoln County, and Robin Stowe, the Corporation Counsel from Langlade County. One thing it directed us to do was, when we get near the end of the 5-year agreement, they wanted us to start to look at what should we do with the agreement. Should we ratify it as it exists, make changes to it, or terminate it? And we began having those conversations at the end of 2019. The contract required us to have a recommendation to you by the middle of 2020. We thought it made more sense to bring that to you before we would have a new board in each of the 3 counties. So that's why we're here today, why I'm here today. So that's the history, that's part of this evolution, the term that Supervisor Zerini used. So what we did starting at the end of 2019 was we looked at how can we capture some of the really positive things that we think the Retained County Authority Committee brought to that relationship with Lincoln and Langlade and the organization at North Central, while also addressing some of the potential negative consequences or some of the negative impacts that are perceived at the North Central Healthcare Board level to really improve the agreement. And ultimately, I think the proposed agreement does that. We work really closely with Michael Loy. I had a couple meetings with the Healthcare Center Board to talk through what some of these proposed changes were. And in short, the document that you have before you really has, oh, this is the agenda. You guys can pull it up within your packet. Let me see if I can pull it up here on the packet. If you look at the proposed agreement itself, we really have what I'll call factual changes, and I'm not going to belabor those very much. That's really just updating some of the historical things that have changed since 2016. So a couple big things that you would have seen when you read through the agreement was North Central Healthcare took over the operation of Pinecrest Nursing Home in Lincoln County. That's a very significant change. It also took over the operation of Lincoln Industries. We also had some just references that in 2017 we had a new contract. So we made those factual changes. But in terms of substantive changes, there are three that I want to talk about. But before I get to the changes, I want to address one thing that is consistent from the agreement this board ratified at the end of 2016, and that is we continue to have a time-limited contract that we're proposing be signed today. And if that's on page 53 of your packet, you can see that again, the proposed contract calls for an agreement that is 5 years in length. It again calls for that same process for the boards to undertake before the expiration of that agreement, sit down, talk about what's going well, what can we change, and make a very well-reasoned decision as to how to move forward. So that's on page 53 within your packet, so that is preserved. But ultimately, we have three what I'll call substantive changes, and the first of those really relates to the makeup of the North Central Healthcare Board, and that begins on page 39 of your packet. And what you see is there are a couple ways that board makeup is changed, and it begins with composition of the board, started in subsection C that's up on the screen before you. And it essentially takes the Retained County Authority Committee as it existed in the 2016-2017 agreement, and it integrates that Retained County Authority Committee into the North Central Healthcare Board. And it does that building on subsection C, it builds that into the next page, and it talks about that being done through the Executive Committee of the North Central Healthcare Board. And the reason being, the Retained County Authority Committee is really made up of the chief administrative officers or their designees of each of the three counties. We found that to be very effective in really assisting North Central Healthcare in understanding how that interplay, how that interrelationship works. I'll give you a brief example. Scott's office prosecutes mental commitment cases on behalf of Marathon County. It also does that now with respect to Lincoln County. And when someone is put under a mental commitment, they are to be supervised in the community. And what supervision meant to the counties, with our experience, is similar to a social worker that we deal with through social services. That framework of reference didn't exist within North Central Healthcare. So we spent a lot of time in our first year really trying to create a shared understanding of what we were looking for in terms of monitoring in the community. And we've seen a lot of benefits from that. So it was really important that we preserve the Retained County Authority benefit of having that chief administrative officer on the North Central Healthcare Board. And we built that in through the contract, providing that each of those chief administrative officers are members by virtue of their designation of their position. And you see that within the Executive Committee on page 40 of the packet and page 13 of the agreement. It really talks about the committee, the Executive Committee being composed of the highest appointed administrative official from each county, as well as the chair of the North Central Healthcare Board. The other change with respect to the Executive Committee that we really instituted within the agreement is we codified the existing practice of the board chair of the North Central Healthcare Board being a member from Marathon County. We, the members all recognized, we had good conversations with our partners from Lincoln and Langlade, and there was recognition that because Marathon County is the primary financial contributor, we also have we're here in Wausau is the main campus for North Central Healthcare. It was agreed upon that it's important to have a very strong tie to Marathon County. So you'll see later in the agreement, particularly on page 46, when you read through, that it provides that the board chair of the North Central Healthcare Board is an appointee from Marathon County, and that is in section 10 here, and it provides again that the selection of the North Central Healthcare Board and the chair-elect shall be appointees from the Marathon County Board. So again, solidifying that relationship, ensuring that one of the concerns of Marathon County back in 2016 is really making sure that that county voice is heard, particularly for Marathon County. It's codified within the agreement. Apart from those changes of integrating the retained county authority committee into the board and ensuring that the board chair be a member of Marathon County, there's one other significant change that I'll reference relative to board makeup, and that is that we were very explicit about how the seats are allocated. Historically, within the agreement, it was simply stated that Marathon County had 10 seats that it would appoint, without tying that back to the fact that really underlie that, which is Marathon County is the primary financial contributor to North Central Healthcare. So we modified that by being very very explicit in the contract, saying that, again, the application of the allocation of the appointees is made with that financial contribution in mind. So you'll see that 4 of the appointees now under the Community Service Program Board, the North Central Healthcare Board, are made up of those chief administrative officials from each of the 3 counties, as well as the president of the medical staff. The remaining 10 seats are allocated 7 board members being appointed by Marathon County, 1 from Langlade County, and 2 from Lincoln. And the reason that Lincoln essentially gains a seat in this contract is by virtue of taking on Lincoln Industries and Pinecrest Nursing Home. That's a significant financial contribution towards North Central's ultimate budget. So when you do that financial analysis, it calls for that additional seat allocation. So that really wraps up what I call the first substantive change, that North Central Healthcare makeup, the board makeup. The next change is on page 37 of your packet, and it relates to how North Central secures legal services. Historically, North Central, by virtue of our agreement, North Central would contract with private law firms for those legal services. What it found over time, and this is referenced in the memo that's also within your packet, is that the need for legal services has increased. At the same time, costs have gone up significantly, and that's put significant budget constraints on North Central Healthcare. We did an evaluation, Scott's office, I worked with Scott to put together that memorandum that's in your packet, and we really think we can do that in a more efficient and effective way by essentially providing legal services through the Marathon County Corporation Counsel's Office and creating an additional assistant corporation counsel position. That individual would then take direction both from Michael Loy, they'd have an office at North Central Healthcare, but they'd ultimately be an employee of Marathon County and be supervised as well by Scott Corbett. So we think we can do that better, cheaper, more efficiently, and at the same time, one of the primary reasons in the old previous agreements that private legal counsel was important was that in the event that any potential conflict of interest would arise, it's important to allow an outlet for separate counsel to be retained. We continued that within the agreement. You'll see that again in subsection C on page 37. So changing the way in which legal services are provided was that second major component in terms of substantive changes that we made. The last one is really on page 47 of your packet, quite simply, this is an attempt by the retained County Authority Committee and the North Central Healthcare Board to give some direction to Michael Loy, the current CEO, and any future CEOs of the organization, in the event they're approached by outside organization, non-owner counties, so surrounding counties that may want North Central Healthcare to deliver a service on their behalf, or a private entity, nonprofit perhaps, that wishes to enter into an agreement with North Central Healthcare for the delivery of services. As North Central continues to build its core, its strength around its core businesses, which are behavioral health outpatient counseling and inpatient psychiatric hospital, skilled nursing, I think it's more likely that that we'll have occasions where individuals or entities, I should say, would want to have those conversations. And up until this point, there was really no direction within the contract for how those conversations should happen, or when an agreement would be appropriate and when it would not. So we provided at least some framework. They're very broad. Certainly, when you read through that, you recognized it. Quite simply, they are that any agreement that we would enter into needs to be something that's legally permissible. That's always a good thing. We wanted to have separate governance, separate accounting, and we needed to make sure that that enterprise, that with that outside entity, really needed to ultimately benefit the member counties. If it doesn't accrue to the benefit of each of the member counties, Lincoln, Langlade, Marathon, it's not something that North Central should ultimately be pursuing. So those are the three primary changes in terms of substantive changes that were made to the agreement. I'll end with just a little update in terms of where we are at this point. This body is considering whether or not to adopt the agreement before you at its meeting on Tuesday. Both Lincoln and Langlade have already approved, their full boards have approved the proposed revisions. The effective date of this new contract would be May 1 of this year, so we would have time between, should this board approve the proposed revisions, we would have time to implement some of the changes that I went through today, because there would be a couple of things we'd need to do, but we're certainly confident that we can do that. And again, Lincoln and Langlade have already approved it as it exists. So with that, I don't have anything else unless there are questions.
Any questions? Supervisor Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a 5-year deal. In the past, have we always had a multi-year contract with the tri-county setup?
It was unending. The
Correct.
last agreement was unending. There was no cessation date or requirement to renegotiate the contract.
Okay, but a lot of the stuff that's, except for the changes you mentioned in the retained county authority, we've always had a lot of this verbiage in the old contracts, did we not?
Correct.
Okay.
I would say we cleaned a lot of it up. So if you would have looked at the red line version, I believe that was in your packet last time, a lot of it was red, and there were other colors in there as well. But a lot of that is cleaning up just statutory references, and we did a significant amount of moving portions of the contract around. So for example, the retained county authority section existed in one part of the agreement. We essentially deleted it from one area and moved it to another. But I would agree with your assessment. A lot of the changes are just those substantive ones that I referenced, and the factual ones, the vast majority of the agreement remains the same.
Supervisor Rosenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Lance, for your work on this. I know that you and a bunch of lawyers and everyone has kind of dug through this and really found the places, not just to update the agreement, but to find better, like finding those legal services. It helps us out from a cost model too. So I just want to say I asked around to a couple of people that sit on the North Central Healthcare Board, talked to Michael Loy. I talked to a bunch of people about this. What do you think? And everyone has kind of agreed that this is really good evolution moving forward. And there's still some things to look at, but it's looking good. So just thanks for your hard work.
Supervisor Robinson.
Just a couple of questions relative to implementation. One is that the agreement calls for the development of a 3-year plan, the local plan, and it's an inventory of existing resources, needed new resources and services, long-range goals and intermediate range plans, and dealing with homeless and others. And is that shared with the Health and Human Services Committee? And is it conveyed as part of the budget conveyance to us, so we, as a county board, have access to that information? If not, it should be, so that we can look at that in the context of what that plan identifies. So I would, as you're going back and implementing this, I would hope that we'd have communication on what that plan looks like. It's required by the state, but I think it would be of value to us as well.
Absolutely. And I want to say one thing, it absolutely is required by statute under Chapter 51. North Central has actually engaged a consultant, HSRI, to do that strategic plan, which really addresses all of the concerns and all the requirements of that long-term and short-term plans that are set out in statute. And once, I believe that should be done this year, May. And when that's done, certainly the intent is to circulate that not only within each of the 3 member counties, but their respective committees.
Okay. Then on page 22, paragraph 9, it calls for the finance directors to convene meetings with members county, or requires that the convening of meetings for member county finance directors, and it talks about two times. I assume that's 2 times a year, but it is not clear, and I think we need clarification just for the record, because the agreement's a 5-year agreement. You don't want them to meet every 2.5 years, and I know that they meet more often, but I just would like to make sure we've got that on the record.
Thank you.
Okay, and we go to Supervisor Seiler, and I stepped over you, and I apologize. I was not intentional. Supervisor
That's okay.
Seiler.
Well, if I stand up, maybe you can see me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the packet, I think it's page 35 in the packet, page 8, at the bottom, Lance, F, designated protective services and protective placement agencies. Are these the same designated services that are currently under consideration, the adult protective services of a possible transfer to ADRC?
Correct.
Okay, and I was just wondering, because what we're talking about now is a 3-county, and now we're talking with those protective services would go to a 4-county coalition, and that still hasn't been thoroughly decided. It's in discussion at the EDRC. So I'm just wondering if that would make any changes here, if for some reason the 4 counties didn't take that on.
It would certainly it would require us to make changes if that transfer from North Central Healthcare from relative to adult protective services to the ADRC of Central Wisconsin took place. We actually had alternative draft language prepared. We were working on that again since the really couple months, probably since October of 2019, we were working on it. And in the event that transfer would have happened, we would have already changed the language. Because it hasn't, we really just did some factual updates indicating when each of the 3 counties did transition their responsibility for adult protective services to North Central Healthcare. So you're absolutely correct that if that transfer occurs, we would not only have to amend the underlying Aging Disability Resource Center of Central Wisconsin contract, that agreement, we'd also have to amend this agreement. But each of the respective agreements that I just talked about have very clear language as to how you do that.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to item 9C, 2B, designating February as Teen Dating Violence Awareness and Prevention Month in Marathon County. Resolution 9-20. Supervisor Rosenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to give a little kind of history on where this came from and why we're talking about it. During our budget discussions last year, we talked a lot about our funding for nonprofits, and one of the things I was interested in, okay, we give money, what are these nonprofits doing? So I went over maybe January, I went to the women's community, and I just kind of got a good lay of the land, like what are you working on? And one of the people I talked to was Kimberly Pufall, and she is a youth educator for the women's community. And one of the things she does is she goes to the schools all over the place, not just Wausau East. When the day I talked to her, she had just come back from Edgar High School. So she's all over kind of talking about healthy relationships and things like that. And she said, you know what, there is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month in February. Is there anything that the county could do to recognize this? And I said, well, sure, I don't think we've ever done it. So as you can see on this actual resolution, there are 15 footnotes. So like the weekend after I talked to her, I dove into it all. Some of it's from the Marathon County Youth Risk Behavior Survey. Some of it's from national sources. And some of the percentages are pretty staggering of high school age students who are in abusive relationships. And you'll see that especially maybe more marginalized populations are even more at risk for this. So the idea was to kind of get this information in front of people, start talking about maybe healthier relationships, and especially some of the information from the newest Youth Risk Behavior Survey is in there. So take a look. If anyone has any questions, I would be happy to try and answer them, but probably more likely I would give Kimberly an opportunity to talk about that.
Okay, anything else? Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on to item 9C3, Human Resources, Finance and Property Committee under 9C3A, approved 2020 budget transfers from Marathon County Department of Appropriations, Resolution 10-20. Any questions? Okay, item 9C3B, resolution awarding the sale of $8,500,000 general obligation promissory notes, Series 2020A, Resolution 11-20. Any questions? Okay, moving on to item 9C3C, a resolution determination by Marathon County that the emergency with respect to the repair, reconstruction of the Marathon County Jail has ended. Resolution 12-20, and I've asked the interim administrator to provide a brief presentation on the overview of that whole project, the cost, and so I would invite him to the podium to provide that presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could have Mr. Christians also come up from Facilities and Capital Management. He was our primary point person from Facilities on the project. We'll do a brief PowerPoint. I will walk you through the level of detail that I think you need. In the event you need real detail, Mr. Christians is here to answer those questions. In terms of what the purpose of this report is today, as the chair alluded to, the real issue before you, the only policy issue before you for next Tuesday is going to be whether or not you approve the resolution declaring the emergency to have ended. That is required by statute for the emergency to be put in place. It's a vote of this body, and it continues until you vote to say it is over. We believe it is over. We're asking that you approve the resolution. As the chair alluded to, the chair asked me to provide a brief recap of the project, and I'm going to do that in a couple of fashions. First, just a real quick overview of the underlying issues we were seeking to address. Two, the work we completed that Facilities and Capital Management oversaw. A brief update on the budget, and then finally next steps, because there are a couple of next steps that we do want to talk through. In terms of the issues we were trying to address, really there were two. The structural concerns related to inadequate slab column connections and sizing. So what that means is where the floor sits on top of the column, we had issues. That connection, the column capitals were inadequate in terms of size, and we had significant deflection within the floor, which is really the second piece below. That's the second concern. We had concerns relative to the concrete such that the slab was deflecting and there was improper load distribution. In layman's terms, the floor was bending and it was putting weight on interior walls, in structural members, interior walls, when really that load should have been dispersed out to the load-bearing columns that you'll see pictures of in just a minute. So those were the,
We'll just add one thing. This did not happen in our jail facility. This picture is depicting what column shear and shearing, punching shear would be. This, if I'm not mistaken, this is actually a picture of where punching shear took place in a structure in Florida.
Florida? Correct. There you go. Fair point. It did not. That would have been a different presentation. Okay, so with those structural concerns as background, what did we do really to fix it? And those were three things. The column repairs to correct that punch shear concern we had really related to the installation of numerous bolts that I'll show you pictures of in just a little bit, as well as steel column collars. Essentially what that did was it expanded the size of the column capital and really integrated that capital into the floor system, into the rebar, so that we address those concerns. With respect to the deflection in the floor, that's sagging in each of those decks, those floor decks, what we did was we removed the top block on those load-bearing, non-load-bearing members to relieve that stress and really properly distribute that load to those columns. And then lastly, we did some additional work on the first floor relative to that deflection in the floor. And I'll show you just a couple of additional pieces here. So really with regard to the column repairs, what that entailed was they would begin by surveying the column itself, its size. They would then essentially x-ray the concrete floor to find where the rebar was within that floor. And I'll go back one slide to show you. They would then take and drill numerous 2-foot-long holes through the floor to insert structural bolts to integrate that column and floor system that I talked about before. So you'll see the diagrams on the floor in the top right corner. Those are their attempts based on the x-rays to lay out where the rebar is running. And throughout the entire jail, and Craig is I'm sure gonna correct me, I don't know, how many columns did we address?
I think there was 49 at the end.
49 columns, and we installed, through the contractor working with facilities and capital management, approximately 1,800 holes were drilled with 2-foot steel bolts and resin poured into those holes to really shore up that column capital slab connection system. So quite the undertaking, and just to give you some sense of how really skilled these individuals were, from those 1,800 bolts that they installed, my understanding, we hit rebar twice? Yep. 2 times. And as you would probably assume, an x-ray through concrete isn't the most accurate thing, so they really did a fantastic job, and the spaces they had to get in to do that work were quite difficult to work in. And you can see the individual holding up that little designation as to what column they're talking about. That was the diagram that I showed you on the previous slide. In the bottom, there was a white piece of paper with a diagram. That's what they're working on. So really, they're doing that scanning to avoid the rebar, and ultimately, they're installing that enhanced capital. With regard to that top of block removal, you'll see in the picture before you, essentially what that required them to do was, again, throughout the entire interior structure of the jail where we had floors that were deflecting and putting load in places where there was non-load-bearing structural members, they had to remove that top layer of block. What that allowed the floor to do is, again, it still was deflecting, but it shifted that load out to the columns, those load-bearing columns, those load-bearing structures where that load should be. The deflection in the floor in some of the structures, certainly in the structures remains, but it is appropriate deflection, and we're safe to continue. Then last, with regard to the deflection in the basement, we took an additional step, because what had happened, if you can imagine, the jail is a multi-story building, and as we had load being placed on interior walls, improperly placed on interior walls and interior of the structure, what that did was it caused each floor to have additional weight, additional load placed on it in the middle of those spans. So as you went down, each floor was under additional stress. When we removed that stress on the top floors, the upper floors, we still had significant sagging within that first floor area. And what we ultimately ended up doing was we installed significant supplemental steel structure to take load. It didn't remove the deflection in the floor, but what it did was take some of the load off, shore up some of that additional load. And I'll say one thing that contributed to the additional load is throughout the history of the jail project, dating back to when it was built, when they did have that deflection, you'll recall from your initial presentations on this, they applied leveler to level that floor. Well, that adds additional weight to a system that is already not properly set up to hold that weight. So it was quite an undertaking in terms of the work that they've completed and the time that our facilities and capital management staff have been working with the construction company and all the contractors to get that work done. In terms of budget, you'll recall your initial resolution authorized a transfer of $584,966 for temporary shoring. It provided a sum sufficient allocation relative to engineering, and then your allocation for the ultimate structural work was $1.5 million. You received an update from Facilities and Capital Management and Administration before the end of the year in 2019, where that number was increased. The structural work, the estimate was increased, and you'll recall that the reason for that was our initial estimate relative to the concrete strength. When we did the corings, when Facilities and Capital Management worked to get those corings done, that concrete was supposed to have been spec'd at 4,000 pounds. The test came back significantly less than that, so our scope of work expanded as the project went on, and that was, again, a presentation you received some time ago. But ultimately, in terms of our construction budget, what you see is that we are coming in under budget with respect to many aspects of the work. I'll start with shoring. The initial estimates we had, called for us to do a lot of that shoring as a single exercise, but with your approval through of the emergency declaration, some of that, the nature of the way we did that work changed somewhat. We would shore an area and then install the permanent fix in that area, and we'd be able to essentially leapfrog that shoring forward, so we didn't need the same volume. But I'll also tell you some of the shoring costs then certainly would have been absorbed into that ultimate structural repair budget at the bottom. In terms of engineering, the costs are approximately 10% above what was initially budgeted. I think that's really, they did a fabulous job controlling those costs because, as I alluded to before, the scope of work increased as this project went forward, and each time that they would develop a solution based on one column, if future examination in that project led to the requirement to go back and kind of re-engineer the fix that they had originally had planned, they would do that. And it was really an iterative process between the construction and engineering teams, so they control costs very well. Our insurance numbers certainly came in lower than we had anticipated. The $2,008,149 structural repair item you see there, that is the most up-to-date expense information we have, but we are still, Findorf is still receiving some of the invoices from the subcontractors. We actually expect that number to, if anything, go down. Again, really a great job on the construction side. What I'll say on the jail operations side, our sheriff's office and our jail administrator and her staff did an amazing job as well. The initial transfer you made relative to operational costs was $425,000. The sheriff's office did a great job, and that was to cover not only the housing, but it was to cover inmate medical, transports. They really controlled costs well. They came in on target for budget. We don't envision any additional transfers necessary. We didn't require those at the end of 2019, and we don't envision requiring anything in 2020. So really, quite a team effort between facilities, capital management, and sheriff's office and jail staff. They really did a great job with respect to that, to this project. And as of February, early February, inmates are back in the Marathon County Jail and returning to normal operations. They also, during this time, jail staff, corrections staff did a lot of additional painting. We addressed some of the other issues that are sometimes difficult when a jail is full of inmates. But we did those through our normal procurement or internal staff. That was not within the emergency declaration. So that really takes us to the final slide today. Next steps. Again, the real only policy question you have before you next Tuesday is the resolution declaring the emergency to have ended. What that means from a practical standpoint, it reinstates our standard procurement rules. I will tell you we have some minor cosmetic work that we still need to do on the underside of some of our parking areas, but that is not, doesn't in any way impact the structural integrity of the jail in any way, and there's no reason we can't follow our standard procurement rules. That's why we're here before you asking for you to declare the emergency to have ended. We will complete that work in the spring, and we will do so in accordance with state statute and our local procurement. The last piece that I know this board has discussed previously and made reference to during some of your previous meetings about our work in the jail is the evaluation of what potential legal action we might take. And Scott has done some preliminary work on that. We're not going to discuss that today. Our strong preference would be if you wish to receive additional information on that, and we think we can get you that sometime in March, that we take advantage of the statutorily permissible ability to go into closed session as it does relate to a potential legal issue we may be involved in. So with that, that concludes my presentation. If you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to take those.
Okay, Supervisor Rosenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had some questions, not about the presentation, on time and under budget. That's pretty good news. My question is about the steps we took with electronic monitoring, for instance, to remove some of the inmates from the jail. That wasn't a policy thing, but that was something that we could do, and it saves money, I'm assuming, because we're not housing people. Is that something we are considering moving forward as a jail kind of policy? Or should we consider more electronic monitoring? I know we're balancing the risk, and maybe I'm getting off track here, but just a question about that.
I reached out to the jail administrator, and what I am comfortable telling you today is that the sheriff's office and the jail did a great deal of work looking to maximize our ability to put individuals who are safe to be on electronic monitor on electronic monitor. That's one of the core reasons they were able to stay within that initial $425,000 allocation that the board made in its initial August, through its August action. They did increase the number of people they had on electronic monitor. They deployed some of those corrections staff. They redeployed them to do some of the checks on those individuals as it's required when an individual's in the community. And certainly I would expect, and the sheriff is in the back, but I would expect some of the lessons we've learned to continue. Whether or not we move further with evaluating, expanding that electronic monitor program, I think is something to look forward in the future, and we've discussed that at evidence-based decision-making. But certainly with respect to this project, the sheriff's office worked to, really diligent work to look and make sure who can we safely put out and maximize that number was extremely important to staying on budget.
Okay, any other questions? I think one of the things that we learned, one of the lessons we learned is how do we deal with this, and I want to commend not only the sheriff's office, the sheriff's staff, the corrections division, the corrections staff, maintenance. We were put in a situation and we dealt with it, and we ended up with now a much safer facility. So I want to commend all of those individuals who had anything to do with this project and how it and its outcome. So without any other questions, we'll move on. Thank you. So item 9C, 3D, a resolution amending the 2020 budget and transfer from contingency for $200,000 for jail medical costs and jail medical room capital project, resolution 13-20. Any discussion? Any questions? Supervisor Christensen.
Yes, what is the medical room?
It's a room that is designed for individuals that are potentially contagious. We've had an individual in our care in the past that was contagious that we had to take out of this facility, and it cost the county $1,000 a day to house that individual in a proper facility. And the potential is there again, not only from a individual that may be contagious to other inmates, but in the reverse, if somebody is susceptible to any potential. So the use of this facility would be, the use of this remodel would be for individuals that might be contagious to others, or the reverse, if somebody is susceptible to contagious diseases, who has maybe had heart surgery or does not need to be exposed.
Thank you.
And the deputy administrator, or the interim administrator would like to also address a few issues.
Just one thing, just to be very clear with you, based on, as the chair alluded to, the fact that we've had this issue ongoing, we're currently paying that $1,000 a day for this individual to be housed in another facility. I did authorize Facilities and Capital Management to put together a request for proposal for this work to be done. They did the evaluation, put together the proposal. It has been released. It is, of course, contingent upon this board's approval, but given the significant financial impact on Marathon County, the decision was made to move forward with the release of that document pending your ultimate approval. So if it is not approved on Tuesday, we're not going to move forward, but it was my judgment that in light of the significant costs, we should move forward as expeditiously as possible. I simply wanted to let you know that.
Supervisor White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have just one question. Perhaps I didn't read it close enough. How many patients will this accommodate at one time?
It calls for renovations within the area that we refer to as I block, which is 2 separate individual cells with a co-located shower unit. So we would be able to house 2 individuals at any one time. And I apologize, we got a previous draft of the scope of the project. We made some changes. The time frame this should be completed, it should be done in May if things go according to plan based on the work that Facilities has done. And it should not have any additional impact on jail operations outside of I block, because all of the work outside of that unit would be done on the roof.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You bet. Any other questions? Okay, moving on. Excuse me, Supervisor Mask.
Thank you. Excuse me. I'm assuming that we have never required more than 2 cells before. Is there any speculation that we would need more than 2, or is there room to expand this without a lot of extra expense if we need to in the future?
I don't know that for sure. My understanding is there's no room to expand. I don't know if we've had more than 1 individual with a condition that the chair alluded to, either heightens susceptibility or communicability.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, we will move on. Item 9C, 3E, tentative agreements for a 2020-2021 collective bargaining agreement between Marathon County and the Deputy Sheriff's Association, Resolution 14-20. Any questions? And this is scheduled to go to Finance on Monday. So at this point, Finance will be weighing in on Monday at their meeting, and then be making a recommendation to the full board. Okay, item 9C, 3F, tentative agreements for the 2020 and 2021 Marathon County Salary and Benefits Ordinance for Sheriff's Department Lieutenants, Resolution 17-20. Any questions on that? Okay, from Infrastructure Committee, item 9C, 4A, Central Wisconsin Airport Permanent Utility Easement, Resolution 15-20. Any questions? Okay, moving on from Environmental Resources Committee, item 9C, 5A, approval of the Town of Emmett Local Zoning Ordinance Amendment, Resolution 16-20. Any questions? We are down to item number 10, announcements and/or requests. I do have one, Supervisor Rosenberg?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I have a lot to say tonight. I just wanted to call your attention to some of the news we've seen about the federal administrative policy affecting Hmong and Lao refugees who could be facing deportation. I've heard from a couple of our shared constituents, people that are afraid it's going to affect them. So, I mean, I would just say keep your ears open. I've been directing them to Freedom Inc., an organization out of Madison for services, but it's something I'm keeping an eye on, and I think we all probably should.
Okay, any other announcements? I just have one announcement and a reminder to all board members that next Tuesday's meeting is scheduled for 7:30 and not 7 o'clock. So please put it on your calendar for 7:30. Anything else? Any other announcements? If not, I will accept Supervisor Opel.
Yes, as one of the people that likes to get here early, and there are several of us, quite often, or I'd like to see, if possible, if we could get the security people here earlier, if possible.
Okay.
Maybe an hour before meeting time.
It does involve budget issues, so we'll take a look at it and see, and I'll report on Tuesday. Any other announcements? Yeah, Tuesday there is 2 other meetings scheduled, so Tuesday is no problem. They'll be here early because we've got rules review and finance on Tuesday before the board meeting, so they'll be here plenty early on Tuesday, but I will not promise, and I'll check into the other requests for regular meetings where there isn't other meetings. And
We're working on building that room.
we'll have that room done by May. Any other announcements? I will take item number 11. Supervisor Schaefer with the motion, Supervisor Nutting with the second to adjourn. Any discussion? All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Wait for somebody to make a crack that, we just had a presentation on the jail. We'll get you a room.
Sorry.
No, you gave him the.